All right.
I think we're live.
Well, I think we're doing it.
Welcome to December. We're almost to the holidays, and we're so excited that you are here to join us for the December webinar. We're going to give just another couple moments for additional attendees to join. But Danny, I don't know about you, but I'm really excited. This is going to be quite different than what we typically
Yeah,
do.
I'm a little nervous.
A little nervous for sure. We're significantly less prepped than we usually are, and we're usually not very prepped. So I don't know if that's saying a lot or a little bit, and sorry, but we got a bang up list of guests. We're actually going to talk to 6 different folks on the webinar and still try to save time for questions.
Yeah.
So we're going to run it fast, but hopefully that keeps it engaging and interesting. So just quickly, my name is Mike Trupas. I'm a vice president here at Foresight Management and help companies make progress in their energy and sustainability journey. I'm joined by Danny, if you want to just quick say hi.
Yeah, I'm Danny McGee. I'm the vice president of innovation at Foresight Management.
Perfect. And then just quickly want to run you through a little bit about Foresight. We have the guest panelists that I talked about. And then just big picture for those of you who this is your first webinar, welcome. This is exciting and maybe I'm sorry, but we're so excited to have you here to join us for the chaos today. And just a little bit about Foresight. Big picture, you can think of us as outsourced energy and sustainability managers. So a lot of our clients are industrial manufacturers. They're looking to make progress on their energy and sustainability journey. They may not have in-house resources to do that. And so we are committed to helping you be able to make progress on your energy and sustainability journey in a cost-effective manner. You could say democratizing that.
Yep.
So, all right, let's jump in to the topic at hand today, or the topics at hand today, and maybe just a couple housekeeping items. We're not going to do attendee questions to our guests. We're going to save those to the end. So what's going to happen is we're going to invite a number of different people on and kind of a rapid fire understanding of different topics of the year past and the year forward. And then we are going to bring everyone back in a Brady Bunch style at the end. And so if you have questions, you don't have to wait to the end. You can start typing them and filling up that queue of questions. But what we'll do is we'll be asking and hearing from our panel of experts, and then we will be from there going and taking those questions at the end.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, like all of our panelists are on throughout this webinar. So yeah, fill the Q&A with questions as you go along, and if someone can answer them, they'll jump in and do that.
So Cassie, you're our first esteemed guest. Welcome. Do you mind just giving a quick introduction to all the attendees?
Yeah, so I'm Cassie Lee. I am an account manager with Cornerstone Environmental Health and Safety, which is a Foresight company as of 2024. So my year in review has had a lot of roller coaster rides, but super fun. I've been with Cornerstone for 7 years and now part of the Foresight fam for a year. My background is actually environmental management from IU Bloomington. Go Hoosiers. So yeah, this is my first webinar, so I'm excited and nervous and all the feels. I have all the feels.
I love it. That's great. Cassie is been a joy to collaborate with down in Indy. Okay, so Cassie, we wanted to take a little time with you and just assess what's happened in the past year. So what have you been hearing from your clients around sustainability here in 2024?
Yeah, so the big thing from EH&S folks this year has, as it leans into sustainability, has been a lot of what we get from our clients is what their clients are asking of them. So clients asking them to fulfill sustainability requirements for reporting, greenhouse gas emissions, chasing energy and tracking all that data. So it's been the big thing as it leans into sustainability. I will say for me, and we all know I'm very verbose, so I won't dive into this. It's been a really exciting year because when I graduated 20 years ago, I was really engaged in, was that, you can hear that? I don't know, webinar.
I didn't catch it, Cassie.
I'm new to this. Yeah, so when I graduated with my degree, I was super excited to go out and change the world and hug trees. And then the reality of that hit in 2005, and it was more like everybody's spending money and buying real estate. So my field time was different, and it's been fun to really lean in and embrace the sustainability conversation, especially this year as we've joined Foresight. And the most fun for me is that we both have these digital tools. And it's really been fun to watch over the years the data migration into that as people just embrace that and the simplicity of it and how it tracks and streamlines reporting. From our end, it's a lot of compliance reporting. And where you guys come in is a lot of, EcoVadis scoring and tracking your energy usage. And so that's been really great to see people just as for my personal passion and leaning into it. So that's been fun. I think the biggest topic this year, just swirling around the environmental, is PFAS, which is, I don't know, it's kind of a tumultuous topic right now, just kind of heading into what we're looking forward to in January, and how that might change the regulations around it. But if you're not familiar with PFAS, they're per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. You're welcome.
Well done.
Thank you. And it actually should be PFAS, but it's per and poly. So to kind of break that down, where you see it in applications is water resistant materials. I'm not going to name any brand names, nonstick coatings, things like that. So something present in all of us, sadly, after all the years, but it's this massive group of chemicals that because of their chlorine, their carbon fluorine bond, have a hard time breaking down, or virtually impossible to break down in nature. So they've been deemed the forever chemical. Obviously, with technology and medical advancements, we know now that those aren't good for us. So we're kind of chasing into that as we're looking at the EPA asking for a look back period on it. And again, all this might change going into January of 2025. So but those are probably the three biggest thing. And again, like the digital transformation, data transformation has been the most engaging and just life-giving for me personally. And I'm excited to see where it goes in 25 with you guys.
Yeah, it has been interesting learning across the board, I think, for all of us to see organizations, exactly to your point, Cassie, starting to think about sustainability and compliance as similar topics. And it's great. You guys are at the forefront of compliance and we're working on sustainability. So that's been really fun to collaborate with you. So again, as a reminder to you folks, and thanks, Cassie, for hopping on. If you have questions for Cassie about PFAS or reporting requirements for sustainability or anything else, you can go ahead and put those in the chat. Cassie, thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you here at the end. See you later. And then we're rolling. We're keeping, I love this. We're keeping it moving. So our second guest also is a friendly face and one you've seen on the webinar a number of times. Wendy Schlett is going to be joining us to talk about what's happening in January with the administration change. For those of you who don't know Wendy, she is a managing director here at Foresight, has a unbelievably deep well of knowledge around sustainability and has been doing it a long time. And actually, Danny, I guess you've been colleagues with her longer than any of us have.
Yeah, Wendy and I have been working together for 9 years. Is that right, Wendy? So
since 2014.
Yeah,
we made it to 10. There you go.
Yeah, keep adding one, Danny.
Yeah, I'm hoping to just keep it. Yeah. So when Wendy and I have been working in different spaces, but together for the last 9 years, and so I think the question to 10 years, sorry, I think the question to you, Wendy, and I think we invited you on this because you've been asked this in other spaces, is Cassie just teed up, like, there's an administration change in the White House in the US come January. We're talking about PFAS and all of these stuff that's regulated. We have regulation as it relates to ESG and both of like air, water, waste, regulation and compliance stuff that the other parts of the business are doing.
Not to mention energy prices.
Yeah, energy prices.
It touches everything.
And so kind of get your perspective on what that means for the industry, for our clients, and things going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. And, this is such a unique time. How often in our history have we had a former president become a president-elect? So, that is something that we're all, paying attention to and watching, the commentary that he's describing to try and understand where to go next. But one of the things I think we are seeing is that, where sustainability is sitting is coming from a lot of different pressures, and those pressures we're not anticipating going away. So some of the pressures are coming from the EU, which is they're enacting regulation that is impacting us in the United States. And so that is going to continue moving forward. So companies are still going to need to comply with a lot of the mandates coming out of the EU. We're also seeing mandates coming and regulatory initiatives coming out of the states. So California has enacted California Senate Bill 253 and 261, and those are not going away. And we're seeing other state level regulations coming into play. You know, Cassie mentioned PFAS. And so a lot of states are starting to pay attention to PFAS from Maine to Minnesota to California. So like we're seeing these initiatives enacted at different levels, not necessarily at the federal level. And so we anticipate that those initiatives are going to continue no matter who's in the White House at this particular moment. You know, the customers of our manufacturers are still going to drive these efforts because they're looking at global implementation and distribution of their products. And so as global regulation and customers are continuing to ask for sustainability efforts, that's just going to continue to, kind of trickle down through the supply chain, no matter where you're located.
Well said, Wendy. I think if I could boil that down, it sounds like there's a lot more considerations than the president. It's certainly a very important position in our world, but the reality is a lot of things happen at lower levels or outside of the United States of America that still impact all of us. We live in a globalized
What it strikes me is like last year at this time, the webinar was around risk and opportunity, right? And bouncing back and forth between those two spaces, and that, the compliance piece has always over time generally trended upwards, and that it's not always driven in one space. And the upshot of that though is like there's a whole space above that to create value, and so at the very minimum, there's opportunity. Like this is all opportunity, to speak about these topics differently, and to for companies to set their strategy to incorporate how they're dealing with PFAS, how they're doing managing these metrics and doing these types of things.
So great, Danny.
Actually, and just to add on to that, Danny, if you think about a manufacturing entity, and let's say they have 10 sites across the globe, and trying to comply with, say, 5 different state mandates, that can be challenging. Thinking about trying to identify what is that strategic highest level that you have to attain, no matter where you're located, that can help, that will guide your strategy going forward more than any administrative change could potentially guide that strategy. So.
That's pretty
Well, this is a great way to end it, Wendy. Thank you so much for joining us. Wendy will be back here in a few moments. And I feel like, Danny, you're uniquely situated to introduce our next guest.
Actually, the next 2 guests are people that they're like 2 of my go-tos for, and have been. Just to better understand what's going on in the market. So Pete Oliver has held a number of different roles within the climate space, and so I think I'll let you introduce yourself. But I think for the purpose of this webinar, Pete has a deep expertise in decarbonization around the supply chain and understanding kind of what that means in a broad sense. So, perfect. Pete, do you want to just give a short intro, and then we can jump into the questions?
Yeah, thanks everyone. And thanks, Danny, for inviting me on. A pleasure to get a chance to chat with you all. My background is primarily in carbon removal and decarbonization. I am the founder of a company called Arc Climate. We help large corporations decarbonize their supply chains, as specifically to lower the cost of capital to do that work. And I've kind of been in innovation and looking at both carbon markets, carbon financing, and practical decarbonization. So that's my world.
Good stuff, Pete. So we got 2 questions for you. We did a kind of a quick run through the first few folks, and we want to take a little bit more time with some of our deep experts. So I think there's going to be kind of 2 questions for you, Pete. One is a look backwards, and one is a look forward. So maybe for the look backwards, holy cow, have a lot of things changed with primarily SBTI, which then drives down into the REC market, which is renewable energy certificates for those of you who aren't familiar. So that's all of your green energy, as well as carbon offsets. So that has been a wildly hot topic in 2024. So Pete, could you just kind of run us around, like what's been changing in the last year in those topics?
Yeah, so wild year for carbon markets. I would say bumpy year for carbon markets.
Yeah.
We kind of still very much down from just from a broad market perspective, from the highs of 2020, 2021. Seen a couple consecutive years of decline in terms of volume traded. Um, uh, Retirements are relatively flat as people kind of continue to move through the commitments that they have made. But the overall market, I would say, what you're seeing is kind of what people are both happy and uncomfortable with this, which is a flight to quality, which is both a good thing for the market in that people say, hey, we want to do um, we want to be really clear about what it is we're getting when we invest in carbon removals or carbon offsets. Um, and uncomfortably, a lot of what, happened in this really kind of like frothy period around 2021, 2022 has come under a lot of scrutiny, um, and not borne up so well. And so that's kind of like brings us to this past year in which we have the two different kind of international organizations that have very similar acronyms, but both around the integrity of the quality of the credits that are being issued. The no, I don't. I'll go back and forth on this.
Is it
Um,
alpha? Is it a more alphabet soup, Pete?
Sorry, ICVCM.
There
It's the
you go.
Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market. So, like, to give you an idea of the level of scrutiny they're putting on here, um, they have recognized only uh, about 5% of the issued carbon credits over the last year, which means that like there's an idea, hey, this is a wide market and it's used for a lot of different things. And I'll get into that idea in just a minute, but like what are we actually doing and like can we look clearly at that now? And I think after in 2023 we saw The Guardian, BBC, a bunch of other reporting that was kind of held up a very uncomfortable mirror to the voluntary carbon market community. I think there
Absolutely.
has been a really positive response in the wider community, which is like, okay, great, let's face these things. We can face them now. Um, so I would say, like, if you were to say, uh, well, voluntary carbon market, I'm not sure how real that is. Like, I think retrospectively, I think that is a reasonable evaluation of the quality of work that has gone on until now. I would say prospectively, you're going to see much higher quality work being done across the board, which is good for everybody.
Yeah.
I think just to give you an idea of scale, like in 2022, the voluntary carbon market was about a $2 billion market. Now it's something less than $1 billion. We'll get those
Wow.
figures at the
So
in
it's been like
next
chopped
year.
in half.
Yeah, so it's about half of that now. So
Wow.
we don't
So
know
I did
what
not realize that.
yeah, so
does
it's
Yeah.
um
well,
yeah,
Danny,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
well, I was gonna. Is it? I think like given all that, like and pivoting to what a lot of the people now are kind of trying to figure out. We saw a lot of this. I like your flight to quality. I like your kind of the way you frame that. Um, what do companies do with that, right? Like,
Yeah.
because I think there is a lot going on there, and then it's hard to kind of understand the signals from and the whole noise of the matter.
Yeah, and I think it's worth like thinking about what to do now, right? I think it's worth dividing the underlying needs that drive the voluntary carbon market. So I think that there are like two core things that the voluntary market is for at this point. And it's worth thinking about how to address those different competing interests. I mean, not competing, but different value propositions that the VCM provides. So the first one is that the VCM is just a way to comply. You have to do things from the voluntary carbon market um, in order to like I want to make sure so and so says that we can this particular, for example, a CBAM or one of California's regulations says that you can use the voluntary carbon market to to hit a certain sort of regulatory target that you want to hit. That is a way of kind of like, okay, great, we're going to do this work. And I think that work basically can and should continue. Um, I think as a part of that compliance view of the voluntary carbon market, there's also a way in which a corporation can use this to kind of front run regulatory um, uh, opportunities or challenges that they think are going to happen soon. So, hey, we're going to have to start dealing with this come 2027. How do we start dealing with it now so that we're not caught off guard? So both of those are kind of like compliance-oriented ways of viewing it. The second would be like a philanthropic look at the voluntary carbon market, which is like we're doing this because we should, or because our stakeholders want to, our staff wants us to, our leadership wants us to. This is a change we want to see in the world. This is typically driven internally by the factors I just listed, or is associated with positive PR. I think we all know that PR is, that side of this equation has really fallen down over the course of the last 2 years, and people are saying, "Hey, should I be doing this to get good PR?"
Is it worth it?
Yeah, I would say anecdotally, people are kind of saying, "Hey, I want to keep my head down right now. I'm worried about doing this work and it potentially being a liability."
And what's been interesting, Pete, is if I can interrupt, please. It's interesting because I think you're right on the two drivers, and where a lot of our clients, especially being in the industrial space, have not started on their voluntary journey yet. But to your point, I actually would argue the ones that seem to be the most serious are looking at it in both of those ways, which is actually pretty cool. So it doesn't have, those don't have to be mutually exclusive. We certainly see companies that are only looking at it as, I want to make sure I'm staying ahead of compliance, or only looking at it as, I want to engage in my stakeholders. But it's actually interesting. I feel like the conversations we've had, those are the two drivers. It's really great that you bring that perspective, because it really does seem like as companies are starting to think about this in 24, 25, they're trying to make sense of the voluntary market. Those do seem to be the two big topics. Go ahead.
Yeah, and can I just add this one bit here before I wrap, which is just basically, I think that we are at a point of transformation for the VCM in which corporations are going to be moving from those views of compliance or of philanthropy towards a value creation or an opportunity view on the voluntary carbon market, which is how do we use the VCM to drive value back into our business? And let's look at that action through a value lens, right? So corporations that have been doing internal carbon pricing, for example, to either drive the philanthropic side or compliance action, can now look at that and say, hey, this is now our investment budget. Or what is how do we take the sustainability budget and turn it into product transformation, risk reduction, cost reduction, et cetera. And so I think there's an opportunity for both corporations and sustainability leaders to get closer to their businesses and see this as an opportunity to do the kind of work that will result in the organizational change that they want to see anyway. And that can be the kinds of stuff you guys have talked about. Hey, we think PFAS is going to be a problem. We want to get ahead of that. We've got to transform our product. Here's how we do that. So I think that is if I were to say what's next for the VCM, it's the transformation from compliance or philanthropy into value creation.
Well, it speaks really to your earlier point, which is a lot of this is like trying to make sure that the VCMs themselves are doing something, right? Yep. And now it's like, okay, now that they're doing something, let's apply it. Yeah, to driving real value within the company and meeting the needs of the company.
It's hard to do, and it takes a lot of planning, but if you can execute on it, that is wildly compelling. Cool. Well, hey, Pete, it's great. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you here in a few minutes. Gosh, I feel like I should have you introduce the other person because we're 2 for 2 on Danny's buddies.
Yeah. I don't think Kai and I have sat in the same room together. Kai and I met during COVID and had lots of conversations virtually. And he and his team struck me as incredibly brilliant around the space of ES&G. And so when we were thinking about experts that could speak to some of the kind of trends in the world, he was one of the first people I thought of. So Kai, I think I introduce you differently every time. So I'm sorry.
That makes it fun. I love that.
That's okay.
You don't know what I'm going to say, so I'll let you introduce yourself at this point.
Sure. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, and I try to change just for you every time. It's important to adapt. So my name is Kai Gray. I am the co-founder and managing partner of a company called Motive. Motive specializes in ESG. We primarily help private market investors, a lot of private equity investors, with incorporating and integrating ESG into their decision-making, their investment portfolio, and then supporting their portfolio companies. And so we really, we look at, ESG sustainability at large for us is very much a compliance issue. So, if you think about your typical private equity investor, not a lot of them think about these things as fun topics, but the people who are pushing them are very large asset managers, particularly European asset managers. And so when someone's writing you a $200 million check and saying, hey, we want you to do this, you're going to say yes. And so they turn to us to help them do that. And, in the course of that, we help a lot of portfolio companies, which are just private companies in a myriad of spaces, sort of fulfill their ESG goals and help develop roadmaps and things like that. But, so we're very focused on, first and foremost, a lot of sort of regulatory space, right, which is changing. And that already came up a little bit earlier. Right now, sort of the regulatory space is dominated by four things, and there's 43 large regulations around the world that we pay attention to, and each one has its own acronym. And I joked earlier I was just going to read a list of the acronyms, like the Oscars.
And then the time would be up.
Yeah, then my time would be up. But so it really depends on where you are. But let's say we'll stay focused on the U.S. But really the sort of the U.S. focus is on Europe, right? And so there's two big things. There's the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which rolls off the tongue, and the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And the two are sort of they're overlapping, but have the CSDDD is really about pushing environmental and human rights things through the supply chain, right? It's very action oriented, right? It's trying to get companies to institute sort of supplier codes of conduct. The reporting directive, the CSRD, is really about reporting those things and creating a standardized format for those things. Those are two very large EU-driven initiatives. The CSRD is already in place. The CSDDD is working its way through a number of EU bodies, but is basically the way people are addressing it is that it is in place. So everyone is gearing up to address that. There's a very, very strong consensus that this will become the landscape very soon, and so we need to get used to that. Why that's important for U.S. companies is if you do any business in Europe, those are going to touch you. For most companies, they have some sort of aspiration of selling something in Europe. So it doesn't matter if you're in Europe, it matters what your revenues are, and it matters what so in Europe they use the term turnover, but the amount of cash flow, your revenues are. But if you hit these thresholds, you're going to be in scope. So those are the two.
And that's public and private, right?
That's public and private. The CSDDD is as they say, non-registered companies and registered companies. So public, private, and it really comes down to how much, I think CSDDD is 20 million euro on the balance sheet, 40 million in revenue or turnover. So those are big numbers. They're not huge numbers. There's lots of companies that fall into scope on that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider, like, Kai, from that perspective, there's a lot of like small businesses that meet that
100%.
criteria.
Yes, the 100%. And so these are really being targeted. I think what's going to happen is, because it's still being worked on, and in fact, I think Germany yesterday came out and complained kind of loudly about the CSRD and wanting to try to streamline that. I think what's going to happen is they're going to segment the world of industry into sort of high impact, medium impact, low impact, and try to start with high impact companies. That's what I think is going to happen. And so high impact is going to be anyone who makes anything with a raw material, period, right? That there's a wide, that's a wide group of companies. I think low impact are going to be the tech companies. And we'll see what the medium impact, if they go that route. And then I think it was Wendy who talked about earlier, sort of on the US front, last year in 2023, there was a lot of talk about SEC regulations, and the SEC trying to standardize things. There were, at the same time, there were a number of modifications being done to the federal acquisition requisition, called FAR. Basically, how the federal government buys things. So the DoD and NASA were putting in climate reporting requirements for their purchases. My guess with the new administration is that those are going to go away. My guess is that the SEC is going to completely stall any of their work. So like I think it was Wendy. I think the states are going to pick it up, and as you said, SB 253 and SB 261 are the main drivers there. Again, they sort of
those are the California ones.
The California ones, right? And I think that as you say, as goes California, goes the rest of the country. Like, if you would like to sell your products in California, doesn't matter if you're headquartered there. If your company makes, now the numbers are higher. It's not like Europe, so we're talking about 500 million and $1 billion as thresholds for 253. So you're a large company at that point. But it doesn't matter if you're a large company that's headquartered in Illinois. If you sell a product in California,
right,
then you're going to comply with that, right? Mm-hmm. And so that means that you're going to start to lean on your supply chain. And I think a lot of people look at these big thresholds and say, well, I'm not going to be there. My company's not 500 million, but they may be in the supply chain of a company that is. And it's very likely that they are, right? A lot of small companies are in the supply chain of much larger companies. And it's those much larger companies that are going to push that down through their supply chain. And so that's what I think is really this year is going to be a lot of supply chain pressure.
So much there, Kai. Thanks for joining us. And certainly, if you have questions on the unfolding regulatory landscape moving forward, put those in the chat, and we'd love to pick those up as we go. So thanks for joining us, Kai. The next person that will be joining us is actually a dear friend of mine. I feel like I'm uniquely situated to introduce her. Her name's Terry. She has, I think what makes Terry so special is she is a client at a company called Auto Kineton and has since transitioned into a role at Magna. And a lot of sustainability professionals didn't start out as sustainability professionals. It's such a nascent industry that what we're finding is you almost never had a background in sustainability. You had a background in something else and fell into it. And I think where Terry's viewpoint and perspective is so unique is Terry actually was in supply chain and direct purchasing before moving into sustainability. And so I think that puts Terry in a unique spot to be able to understand, like, as scope 3, which we're going to talk about with her, becomes a major topic for so many industrial clients, you literally cannot tackle your scope 3 emissions without bringing your supply chain along.
I think that the tie here, and I would like to say we did it on purpose, but I don't think we did, which is, Kai just literally the last thing Kai was talking about was, how does some of these regulations, how do they show up? And it shows up in the supply chain, and it shows up for, a lot of our clients and around the scope 3 type work and otherwise. So sure. Good transition.
Terry, good to have you. Do you mind giving everyone just a quick introduction?
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Terry Sharp. I am a sustainability manager with Magna, but my background, like Mike alluded to, has been really in the automotive industry with extensive experience in strategic and tactical purchasing, supplier engagement, and supplier development. I was new to ESG and sustainability a couple of years ago, and I was able to get into that space and really learn about decarbonization of our own operations and what ESG and sustainability strategies needed to be implemented at my previous company. I was really excited to get the experience there and really move it to the next level as we shift it down to our scope 3 and in our supply chain. Like Mike alluded to, we've worked together for a couple of years. I'm really happy to work with the Foresight team. And it's really helped get me to my next goal of making a really big impact in decarbonization through supplier engagement and collaboration. So kind of a little bit about my journey, like the typical ESG and sustainability journey for probably the majority of the members of this webinar. It starts with your scope 1 and scope 2, right? You get your emissions information from your operations, and then down the road, you get a request from an OEM or another customer asking for your product carbon footprint, an LCA, or your global warming potential. And that's when you find out, my scope 1 and scope 2 are a drop in the bucket compared to scope 3, right? So in our case, the real emissions were in steel or the aluminum that was being processed. And what you'll find is in the manufacturing sector, scope 3 is significantly higher than scope 1 and 2. It can be 26 times greater than your scope 1 and 2. Wow. In the case of Magna, it's about 97% of our total emissions. So when we talk about scope 3 greenhouse gas, there are 15 categories, but for manufacturing, there are really only 5 that are really impacted for our scope 3. So we talk about purchased goods and services, our raw materials, use of sold product, what happens to our products once they leave, upstream transportation, how do we get the raw materials? By trucking, by rail, what are the emissions associated with that? The waste generated in operations is really important, and where do we find opportunities to reduce that waste? And then the end of life treatment of our sold products. What happens to our parts that are in cars, that are in junkyards or whatever? Can they be taken apart and recycled? Those are our top heavy hitters that impact our scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. But depending on what business you're in, business travel may be impactful, employee commuting may be impactful, leased assets if you have office buildings that you don't own that you lease, the emissions associated with that. And then let's say you ship your parts, your finished goods to the customer, that downstream transportation and distribution can definitely impact your scope 3. So if you don't know what your scope 3 is, you can use a spend report maybe and estimate with some emission factors and get an idea of what your categories are that are really impacting your scope 3, or you can get Foresight to team up with you and do a scope 3 inventory and find these out. So now we know our scope 1, we know our scope 2, we know our scope 3. So how do we reduce it? So the biggest things we need to do to impact and reduce our scope 3 is to set clear expectations and goals, right? Internally, we want a reduction goal for 2030, let's say, and a reduction goal for 2040, all the way up to 2050. Most of the automotive OEMs do have targets for 2030 and 2025. So we set a target. We cascade it out to our supply chain. We educate them on the goal, and then we ask them to start submitting their scope 1 and 2 information. For the automotive space, a lot of us are using Manufacture 2030 as a way to start collecting this data so that we can start rolling it up and looking to see what's out there. The other parts of reduction are the things I'm really excited about, providing resources and training to the supply base to give them the tools that they need and the training to adopt sustainable practices. Oh, my light went out.
Oh, no.
We have occupancy sensors. That's a great way to reduce emissions.
Magna's being efficient. I was going to say, Magna's being efficient.
Yeah, we have occupancy sensors. I didn't know what an occupancy sensor was 5 years ago. So anyway, I've moved up. Anyway, but providing those resources and that training and an opportunity for our supply base to learn energy reduction activities and conservation efforts. I've been in purchasing a long time, and it's always been very competitive. And the best thing about sustainability is it is collaborative. We can compete on product, but we don't compete on sustainability. So the other aspects would be engaging in continuous dialogue. Hey, tell me what your challenges are. What are you working on? Maybe you need some more information to convince your leadership that you need buy-in. Like, let's just keep the lines of communication open to make sure that we can support you in everything that you need to do to reach your goal that helps us reach our goal, right?
So good,
of course, to encourage innovation, one of the things I'll be working on that's new to me is with R&D and the actual materials going into our products, so we can find opportunities to reduce emissions through the process or the material. Another way we can help our supply base is to adopt circular business models. So look at recycling, reusing, reducing waste, collaborating on what we do with returnable packaging or dunnage, or all of those things are just really great opportunities to reduce our emissions. And then the final thing would be make it actionable. You know, make sure our supply base has energy reduction targets. Do they have aspirations for new renewable energy? Can we give them tools to help them access that? Roll out the supplier sustainability requirements that then our supplier can cascade to their supply base, because that'll be their scope 3, right? And then require energy reduction targets as a requirement for new business quoting. You're going to see that coming up more and more from Magna and all the other OEMs. They want to see that you have reduction targets and maybe renewable energy policies as a condition of quoting and of new business. So that's what you'll see. You'll also start seeing the requirements added to PO terms and conditions. They want to make it actionable, and you know, really though, the key to get it all going is to collaborate and to make sure that our suppliers have the information that they need. And really, collaboration allows smaller companies to leverage the strengths and capabilities of a Magna or a GM or a Ford to help them drive their own sustainability initiatives and goals. But working closely together with the suppliers and the customers and all the other partners and consultants will really give us a chance to make a difference.
Great. I love it, Terry. And you're such a wealth of knowledge. I think
thank you.
Great learning on scope 3. And I think there's a huge component of, like you talk about here, finesse, right? You have to influence this. You can't actually completely control your supply chain. You got to finesse them. You got to influence them. You got to collect.
And I think like I mean, literally you go down the line here, you know, with Peter and Kai and Terry, like they're all different ways that this, like, to your point, Terry, people are collaborating on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Pete is really focused on the financing piece of this. And you've just named a number of kind of just the influence and control that companies have in this space. And the only way we're actually going to move the needle on this is when all these kind of things start to line up and we actually use all of the tools in the tool chest. So I love that.
Well, thanks for coming on,
Absolutely.
Terry. Time for questions. So we're going to invite our final guest to join us. Oh, we're doing it live. I love it. Let's do it. Come on in, buddy. Brian Pett is the president here at Foresight, and he is going to be joining us for the last discussion. And then after Brian's here, we're going to bring everybody on and start answering some questions. So welcome, Brian. What's going on, man?
Not much. This has been fun. I've been listening in on the other side of the.
We're just like rolling through some topics here.
The background when we were planning this was it kind of evolved live, but we were thinking like the three of us would be doing an end of year, look back and look forward. And then we're like, let's get some of our smart friends and colleagues to come in and talk with us. And then it was like, well, all three of us shouldn't be here while they were all coming in, because there's no way we would like get through all of it.
Sure.
So I opted
Great.
out, which is important. But you guys did a great job.
We're trying to stick to timing. Do you want it?
Time for Q&A.
Perfect. Well, do you mind? Can we ask you a quick question before we jump into Q&A?
If I can answer it. Sure.
So companies, we've heard a lot about supply chain. A lot of organizations are either just starting their journey on sustainability or haven't started it yet. If you're thinking about starting your journey in 2025, do you have any advice to an organization on how they could be thinking about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that it depends on where you're at in the supply chain, whether you are consumer facing, you sell to a retailer that has a location in California, or you're selling to an auto parts manufacturer. I mean, the where to start, I think there's some nuance. But I think one of the things that we can go back to over and over and over again is having a concept of where you're at today. So baseline, like, where is your data? What is the data people are asking for?
What are you trying to do with it?
How do I find it? How do I know it's right, it's accurate, it's structured in a spot? And then, like, really, who are my customers? Who am I serving? Who am I doing this for? And then building a strategy around what to do with the data once you have it in a good spot. And so I think building a strategy is the smart thing, but inherently inside of that, you immediately get to like, well, where are we at right now?
Sure.
And so this data strategy combo is really, I think, where everyone needs to start, whether they know it or not. They end up having to have those questions asked and answered.
Cool. Thanks. All right, so we're going to jump into questions. We have a number of questions that have been put in the chat. And certainly, if you have a question and you want to hear it answered, we'll do our best to answer all the questions, and we will go late. So certainly we don't expect those of you folks who need to run here in about 15 minutes to stay on. But if we're still going through questions, we're happy to go a little bit long on that. So let's start with the first one. I think this one's probably oriented mostly towards Cassie and Wendy. How do you think of PFAS and PFOA in terms of liability and insurance? So how should organizations be thinking about those when it comes to like the liability component and the insurance component?
I'm volleying that one to Wendy. I'm not even shy about it.
No. So, it's a really interesting question. And I think if you take a look at the concept of PFAS from the platform of what is the risk of PFAS potentially being within your product, I think that's the space to pay attention to. So if you have the ability to explore within your supply chain and within the materials that you have that are incorporated into your product and understand if there's PFAS there, then there's a higher risk. And then insurance could, play a big factor in supporting your organization as to how you navigate that risk. I think, it gets back to an awareness, which does take effort in understanding where is PFAS, if it's even within your supply chain and within your product. I think that's probably the most simplistic. PFAS is definitely a challenging, concept, and also very challenging to identify within the supply chain. If your supply chain is a spider web, which most are, it can be challenging to get to the person within the supply chain that may have that information. And so, it really takes a deep collaboration to try and define that. And so the unknown space is the risk. The opportunity is to engage with the supply chain. And then once you have that awareness, it lowers your risk over time.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one too, but I think where we've seen the approach most companies are taking is, good faith efforts to make sure that they understand what's in their material is what they're being judged on, right? Like the actually identifying, every chemical ingredient down to 100 parts per million or 1,000 parts per million, or, whatever the concentration in, is incredibly hard. But we no longer get to just say, well, we don't know. You actually have to say, like, why are you telling me you don't know? Did you ask people? Because if you didn't ask people, that's a problem. But if you ask people and they also don't know, like, then, maybe we're willing to accept that as an answer. And I know that feels a little wishy-washy, but a lot of the regulation right now around chemicals is in kind of in that direction.
Sure. So the second question, I think a number of people could chime in here. So if you have an opinion, we'd love to hear it, is basically there's talk of the Inflation Reduction Act, and as a reminder, that was passed a couple of years ago, and it supports significantly the rollout of renewables across our country. There's discussion about it potentially being rolled back. And the question was around if it were to be rolled back, one, do you think it'll happen? And two, if it were to be rolled back, what impacts will there be to like RECs and carbon offsets? That's Pete, Kai, Wendy.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I believe there'll be other people that need to chime in on this. I'm quite certain, though, that pretty decent chunks of the IRA funding has been actually deployed already to at least various state levels.
Yeah.
And so some of the like rollback is like not rollable.
It's future. Yeah, it's future years.
Not
the past. Yep.
So I'll just lift that tiny piece up, but then let others jump in on the rest.
I guess I would say I would expect the changes in the IRA to primarily be about ongoing subsidies for consumer products, EVs, EV adjacent things like charging infrastructure, heat pump, basically all the kind of small scale stuff that there is an ideological opposition to that specific type of subsidy. To your point, a lot of the industrial policy, both benefits Republican states, is already either in place or sufficiently distributed in terms of like, getting the money out into the world or into hands where it will be stewarded. I suspect that most of what you'll see is just a lack of ongoing support for demand side support at a consumer level. I think solar and batteries in particular have reached a kind of runaway lack of dependency on a lot of policy support that you see particularly embodied in Texas's rollout of renewables. So I guess, I think we'll see state level support in more blue states, particularly California, New York, Colorado. Those states will step in some sense, but I don't think you'll see like a huge whiplash in the short term.
Yeah, I'm inclined. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Pete, you just, I think, answered the next question, which was, will more states start offering incentives for renewable projects? So, kind of what is the state level, posture? And I don't know if there's other.
I guess my perspective on this is what you will see is slowdowns in areas with, Republican leadership and not really good underlying fundamental economics. So in places like Texas, Arizona, Nevada, most of the West, those projects are going to work with or without incentives. And so those will continue. In places where you will see a slowdown will be in places where, these projects were dependent on subsidies to work. And in areas with Democratic leadership, you'll have people stepping into the void. So it is a little bit of a uncertain terrain, but it doesn't strike me as like a wholesale loss of ground, especially if solar and batteries continue to fall in price as they do. Sorry, Kai, go on.
No, I was going to say, so I'm based in Southern Alabama, so it's a very interesting perspective on in any of these topics within sort of my area. And I think, I can look around and see a number of investments that are coming from the IRA. And so I think what I don't feel like a lot's going to change here. There was not huge vocal support, but there's not huge opposition to it either, right? And I think that I think a lot of people understand here that we're ultimately benefiting from this, right? There's a lot of projects there's a lot of money flowing into southern states that, the congressional leadership will be very vocally opposed, but not do anything about it. The local leadership is happily taking the money.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Makes sense.
Well said. Go ahead, Wendy.
I was going to say, I think it's interesting too, there's been a lot of movement to try and onshore manufacturing into the United States. So that's going to be a big kind of driver to keep some of the, the money moving forward in, whether it relates to the IRA and future efforts. I think you're also seeing, a lot of this, as mentioned, is centered around, the transition in the automotive industry and the movement towards EV. Well, you're also seeing a big transition in the oil and gas industry as well, and where they're placing their investments. And a lot of those investments are going into renewables and not into new wells or new oil platforms. So I think you're going to continue to see a lot of the investment shift from traditional into renewables, going forward in the future. I don't see that slowing down because there's more and more demand for that coming from a lot of different brands and manufacturers. And I also, just continue to see the shift, and, Elon Musk is still right next to there, developing those EV cars. So I don't see, that slowing down because, there's a need to stay in business going forward in the future.
Let's stay. Yeah, I think we should stay on the topic. So the next question directly related to this is, how does solar fit into the future strategy for companies? And specifically, will it help companies reach their goals in supply chain? Obviously, Pete, you had a statement that you think it's on a runaway trajectory, and I'm inclined to agree, but just kind of help people understand, and obviously everybody else too, where solar fits into the strategy for companies.
I mean, I think there are different ways to engage with the solar market. I think everyone knows that, but I think power purchase agreements initially looked like they were going to provide a way to access really cheap electricity over time. I would say while that is still marginally true, they look more like they're about cost control and predictability as opposed to true cost savings, at least this point. I think VPPAs or virtual power purchase agreements offer a way for more people to access the solar. But I do think that, like with the growth in energy demand, particularly from the AI and software communities, you're not going to see really, really, really cheap PPAs driving a lot of additional growth because so much of that slack in the market is being taken up. So my expectation is that opportunities in supply chains, around risk mitigation, sure, VPPAs, et cetera. But in terms of pure cost savings, I would be unsurprised if on-site solar in the Southwest and West really scales a lot, constrained somewhat by the fact that tenancy issues tend to complicate that trade-off. But I do think, like,
and I would say that's great, Pete. And while others are thinking about a response, I would say that was a great, big picture overview. My suggestion would be it certainly should fit in your strategy. However, I always say this, and you guys have heard this 1,000 times, but actually the cheapest kilowatt hour is the kilowatt hour that you never consume. And so therefore, I would say before you invest in solar, you should make sure that you've fully invested in energy effectiveness and energy efficiency within your organization. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put a bunch of solar panels on your roof if you don't have efficient LED lighting, you haven't managed your air compressor system well with variable speed drives, et cetera. There's a number of different things in the building. And not to mention, many of those energy efficiency projects carry a faster ROI. It's crazy. We started seeing solar ROIs under 5-year paybacks. And for a 25-year asset, I would argue that's quite compelling. But again, there's still a lot of energy efficiency that we see in manufacturing, especially that is still under a 5-year payback. And so it's like, guys, you definitely want to do solar. However, we'd suggest you start here. And then, frankly, once you've done all that, you actually could probably spec a smaller solar system anyway, or that solar will make up a larger percentage of your total energy consumption.
Can I just add an asterisk to what I said, which is 100% agree. Everyone I've talked to, if you say, what's the first thing I should do on emissions reductions or climate? The first thing is probably transfer your electric consumption to solar in some form. The second is probably convince everyone in your supply chain to do the same. And it's like that's probably true across the market, and I think that provides a base on top of which we can do all these other things. To your point, efficiency obviously comes even before those steps.
Well said.
Yeah, no, well said. I was curious if Terry had thought of, like, you where you sit in the supply chain and where your suppliers, how you've seen solar show up or not show up. I mean, is it?
So in our operations, we are using renewable and solar, but for the supply chain, there'll be a goal to have some portion of renewable energy. In the automotive industry, they're using Trio as a way to. Have you heard of Trio? They're Transform Auto. They're using that to kind of get a bunch of suppliers together that could maybe use renewable energy. So, and it's on a state by state basis, but I agree, like engaging your current energy provider with reductions and all that first, and then turn the lights out and then work towards renewables.
So well timed.
Perfect.
I needed to have that happen when I said it's the best kilowatt hour is the kilowatt hour you don't
There
use.
you go.
Perfect, Gary. That was perfect.
Let's switch gears a little bit.
Just to
please.
Just to put a finer point for those of you who have to go, because it is two.
Oh, thank you.
A couple things all at the same time. One, we won't stop until all the questions are answered, and we'll hang around for as long as you like, because that's just what we do in these things. But many of you maybe had other things scheduled and have to leave right now. And so for you folks, thanks for joining. Happy holidays. All of the rest, relaxation, family, rejuvenation, peace, love, joy. Please have a wonderful next few weeks, and we'll be doing this again next year.
January is how to implement a sustainability plan on a shoestring budget. So that if you're interested in that webinar, there's more information and you can sign up for that already.
And the other thing, and then we will get back to the Q&A, is obviously this is a bit of a live experiment doing all the panelists, and it's been super fun, I think. And so please feel free to give us feedback if you like this format as opposed to the other ones, because that's good for us. We want to do things that are relevant and engaging that people enjoy.
Or if you didn't like it and
if you did like it,
then let us know. We value both sides of the feedback spectrum.
Or if you just really liked hearing from Cassie.
That's right. Okay, back to the Q&A.
Yeah, let's switch gears a little bit. I think that was a great discussion around kind of energy policy and where energy is moving. The next two questions really revolve a lot around strategy. So one was around the positioning the carbon markets and decarbonization as a solution in your decarbonization stack. And they're basically saying, particularly if you want to decarbonize, but you're having trouble meeting yours or your customers' goals, how do carbon credits fit in that stack?
Pete, did you write that?
Well,
I did not. Why don't we give someone else a chance to take a shot at there?
Ben could be a panelist next time. He might have written it. Who's got it? Pete, you want to answer?
I'm happy to take this one, but I feel like maybe Kai or Terry, people that have are spending time actually looking at the conforming with compliance portion of this, I think would be useful perspective. Just because I guess the way I look at this is just simply you would in that case do what is required in your local area to hit those compliance measures.
Yeah, I mean, we run into case, again, we're dealing with a lot of sort of private market investors who, they're not necessarily huge numbers, but they want to offset what they have, and they're looking at sort of hyper local things that they can do, and sometimes it's not even a straight carbon credit, right? It's like, hey, we're going to sort of donate some money to a school, or it's a sort of a wetlands reclamation project or something that a lot of our clients are international, and so they want to find projects that are happening very locally to them, right? So we deal with a lot of Australian clients, and they want things that are just in Australia. They're not looking for global sort of global programs. And so, I mean, those things they're good. They're also sort of part of their marketing package.
That makes sense.
That's good.
Yeah.
I have grumpy opinions. If the other people are thinking, I'm going to be the grumpy engineer here. This is the second question I'm going to do this, which is similar to the last response. Carbon credits should not be in your stack if you haven't made the investments to decarbonize your own organization first. And what I mean by that is continued investment in not just energy efficiency, but even things like waste. Are you sending things to landfill that could be a revenue stream for your organization and also are a compelling Scope 3 reduction story? So this doesn't just have to revolve around energy, but I would say before you start trying to do that outside of your four walls, make sure that you've really thought about how are you decarbonizing your organization and your operations first. Once you've done that, then I think the carbon credits can start to come into the stack.
And I think the beyond the engineer Mike's opinion of that, these are the kinds of things that actually have financial ROIs and pay for themselves.
Yeah.
And so they're closer to being operationalized. They're closer to already being on someone else in the organization's to-do list. And, Terry works in this role a lot, a lot of sustainability folks inside of organizations, they have to know what everyone is working on and then bring people together around if we do this and this and this and think about it in a different way, we're hitting all these different goals as opposed to just scattershot. And that's why this is a big part of how Foresight is wired up, is to help people do this work in a short-term, operationally efficient, profitable way as much as possible. And the carbon, to your point, the carbon credit stuff is really great, but you can make good business decisions and get good short-term rewards and get good buy-in doing these other things, prioritizing these other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that and I like how Kai kind of pointed to the local action. I think Pete, to your point, right? You and I have talked a lot about insetting, right? And I think sometimes we say carbon credits, and what we really mean is we want to buy a thing, we don't know how to apply it, but we want to undo something, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of two sides to this. You can start from we have forestry credits and all these other kind of things, and find the ones that are most applicable to your business and find ways to pull them in.
Sure.
Right. And find the ways to innovate on those types of technologies. And make those part of your, carbon shed, or the other side of this, kind of to Kai's point, is find things that are having impact and find ways to create value from those. And I think whatever direction you're coming from, ultimately we're trying to drive value into the supply chain.
So
that's the ultimate goal. The credits are just a way to talk about it, or a mechanism which gives us a vocabulary to say we're doing a thing, but really it's supply chain oriented. What's the last question?
Pete's waving.
Pete's got one.
I have to run. I'm back to back today, but it's been a real pleasure to chat with you all, and thanks for making time.
Thanks,
Pete.
Okay, last question that I know of, and certainly, Carolyn, if there's more, just make them big and we can read them. But this is great. We can ask this often. It's a good one. There's obviously high costs to perform work to meet regulatory requirements, especially with how strict and how big these regulatory requirements that were discussed today are. And so they don't have traditional financial ROIs, is what this question is they're basically saying we don't feel like these big regulatory requirements have a financial ROI. How do you recommend getting leadership and corporate buy-in when it feels like there's a lot of investment here and it doesn't feel like there's going to be an ROI? There's a Wendy. Yeah, I was Dan, Wendy, Kai.
Yeah, I think
Terry. I think any.
Actually, Kai, I'm curious in your thoughts on this.
If you, there's the negative ROI, right? There's the penalties that come with not doing this, right? So there's definitely a stick here. But when we're working with companies in a supply chain, we get a number of companies who call us sort of outside of our traditional sales channel that says they just got some sort of demand for climate disclosure from their customer. And so in that case, like it's a compliance thing, but if they would like that customer to stay their customer or a potential customer, they need to do this thing. Right. So it's well worth the investment. We had a company, Exxon is sending out, if you're a supplier to Exxon, you're getting a climate disclosure demand. And, and Exxon will just terminate your contract if you don't submit it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Kai. Like we're seeing that as well. We're seeing more demands coming from the customers around the different initiatives than we are even around the regulation. I mean, the regulation is important, and there are,
totally.
mechanisms to, push companies to move in the direction, but contracts and your customers are critical. And we're seeing sustainability being, it's not the only indicator, but if you're not completing a framework or disclosure mechanism that the customer is requesting, whether that's EcoVadis or supplier assurance, like they're holding contracts hostage for suppliers. So, it's impacting business. So I would say, the ROI, and it's interesting, we have just been talking to a number of clients as well who are saying we didn't, at leadership wasn't super interested until they started seeing their customers saying, we're holding your contract hostage. And then they had a lot of movement, but then it had to be fast. And so, it didn't give them the time to kind of plan and strategize and budget for the effort that was needed. And so the more that you can do that preemptively, as you're hearing your customer starting to talk about those things, I think, that's the true ROI space, in many regards.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and I'd chime in on, in our world on the EHS side of it, it is, as Kai mentioned, the negative ROI. When you don't invest in environmental and safety compliance, the costs are greater, right? But to echo Wendy's point that, again, as people are coming to me and saying, can you help me fill out these client forms, these asks that are being sent to me by people who are purchasing from us, the cost of losing that business is the greater cost. So
well said.
I mean, these are like downstream effects of like the free market at work, essentially. Like consumers, we tend to want to buy things that are better for us and better for other people than other things. That's like, generally speaking, I think that that's true. And so companies are paying attention to consumer data and consumer requests, and they're building products and making things that meet those. And then it just goes down to the supply chain. And then the government eventually goes, we should regulate this because there's a bunch of different stuff going on there and we can streamline it. And so I to me, that's the fun part, is like, this is really a downstream thing of like us as purchasers of goods and services. Like we do want to make things that, or buy things and have things and support things that aren't inherently like hurting other people. I think most of the time, this is mostly what we do. Certainly exceptions, but I think that's really what all of this is about. So it's cool.
All righty. Well, to all the panelists, thank you so much for joining us. This was great to hear from so many unique perspectives. And for all of you who made it all the way here to the end, thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll look forward to connecting with you here next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
thanks all.
Happy.